We're still walled in by the weather, reading Walden, Walden Pond. We continue with the ponds. In such a day in September or November, Walden is a perfect forest mirror, set round with stones as precious to my eye as if pure or rare. Nothing so fair, so pure, and at the same time so large as a lake perchance lies to on the surface of the earth. Sky water, it needs no fence. Nations come and go without defiling it. It is a mirror which no stone can crack, whose quicksilver will never wear off, whose gilding nature continually repairs. No storms, no dust can dim its surface ever fresh. A mirror in which all impurity presented to it sinks, swept and dusted by the sun's hazy brush. This the light dust cloth which retains no breath that is breathed on it, but sends it own to float on, as ponds high above its surface, and to be reflected in its bosom still. Ponds can be very nice. You know, I used to swim in the pond on Cape Cod, and it kind of makes sense sometimes, like for convenience. You can, you can, at the same time having the sort of air-conditioned weather of Cape Cod, you can then just swim in a freshwater pond. A pond on Cape Cod instead of the ocean, but you can swim. The ocean's all right, but it's not as easy to get to and get out, and it's salty. A field of water betrays the spirit that is in the air. It is continually receiving new life and motion from above. It is intermediate in its nature between land and sky. On land, only the grass and trees wave. But the water itself is rippled by the wind. I see where the breeze dashes across it by the streaks of flakes of light. It is remarkable that we can look down on its surface. We shall perhaps look down thus on the surface of air at length and mark where a still subtler spirit sweeps over it. The skaters and water bugs finally disappear in the latter part of October, when the severe frosts have come. And then in November, usually in a calm day, there is absolutely nothing to ripple the surface. One November afternoon, in the calm at the end of a rainstorm, several days' duration, when the sky was still completely overcast and the air was full of mist, I observed that the pond was remarkably smooth, so that it was difficult to distinguish its surface, though it no longer reflected the bright tints of October, but the somber November colors of the surrounding hills. Do you see a difference in color between October and November? Mm-hmm. Though I passed over it as gently as possible, the slight undulations produced by my boat extended almost as far as I could see, and gave a ribbed appearance to the reflections. But as I was looking over the surface, I saw here and there, at a distance, a faint glimmer, as if some skater insects which had escaped the frost might be collected here. Or perchance the surface, being so smooth, betrayed where a spring welled up from the bottom. Paddling gently to one of these places, I was surprised to find myself surrounded by a myriad of small perch about 5 inches long, of a rich bronze color in the green water, sporting there and constantly rising to the surface, dimpling it, sometimes leaving bubbles on it. In such transport and seemingly bottomless water reflecting the clouds, I seemed to be floating through the air as in a balloon, and their swimming impressed me as a kind of flight or hovering, as if they were a compact flock of birds passing just beneath my level on the right or left, their fins like sails set all around them. There were many such schools in the pond, apparently improving the short season before winter would draw an icy shutter over their broad skylight, sometimes giving to the surface an appearance as if a slight breeze struck it, or a few raindrops fell there. When I approached carelessly and alarmed them, they made a sudden splash and rippling with their tails as if one had struck the water with a brushy bough and instantly took refuge in the depths. At length the wind rose, the mist increased, and the waves began to run, and the perch leaped much higher than before, half out of water, 100 black points 3 inches long at once above the surface, even as late as the 5th of December. One year I saw some dimples on the surface, and thinking it was going to rain hard immediately, the air being full of mist, I made haste to take my place at the oars and row homeward. Already the rain seemed rapidly increasing, though I felt none on my cheek, and I anticipated a Thoreau soaking, a Henry David Thoreau soaking. Thoreau, through. We're still reading through a thorough reading of Thoreau. A thorough, giving you a thorough soaking of Thoreau. Thorough soaking. But suddenly the dimples ceased, whether they were produced by the perchen, which the noise of my oars had scared into the depths, and I saw their schools dimly disappearing, so I spent a dry afternoon after all. An old man who used to frequent this pond nearly 60 years ago, when it was a darkened surrounding forest, tells me that in those days he sometimes saw it all alive with ducks and other waterfowl, and that there were many eagles about it. He came here fishing and used an old log canoe which he found on the shore. It was made of 2 white pine logs dug out and pined together, and was cut off square at the ends. It was very clumsy, but lasted a great many years before it became waterlogged and perhaps sank to the bottom. He did not know whose it was. It belonged to the pond up in like Connecticut or New York State. They have canoes at each pond, and you can't move your boat from lake to lake because you might transfer manifold germs from one pond to the other. So the boats have to stay with the pond. He used to make a cable for his anchor of strips of hickory bark tied together. In fact, there's people who like to fish on the lakes, right, up there. So if you can't move your boats from pond to pond, or lake to lake, or reservoir to reservoir, then you have to have a boat at each reservoir. So the one guy I met, he had like 7 boats chained to each reservoir, so it could go out peaceably and do fishing at each of his 7 lakes. Right? Because you can't move them from one to the other. It's not allowed by law. But you can have a rowboat at every lake. But then that leads to rowboats all around each lake. But anyways, an old man, a putter who lived by the pond before the revolution, told him once that there was an iron chest at the bottom, and that he had seen it. Maybe there's an iron chest of gold. Sometimes it would come floating up to the shore, but when you went towards it, it would go back into the deep water and disappear. You think it's the treasure chest of Thoreau's wisdom in Walden? It was pleased to hear of the old log canoe, which took the place of an Indian one of the same material but more graceful construction, which perchance had first been a tree on the bank, and then it fell into the water, to float there for a generation, the most proper vessel for the lake. I remember that when I first looked into these depths, there were many large trunks to be seen indistinctly lying on the bottom, which had either been blown over formerly or left on the ice at the last cutting when the wood was cheaper. But now they have mostly disappeared. When I first paddled a boat on Walden, it was completely surrounded by thick and lofty pine and oak woods, and some of its coves, grapevines, had run over the trees next to the water and formed bowers under which a boat could pass. The hills which form its shores are so steep, and the woods on them were then so high, that as you looked down from the west end, it had the appearance of an amphitheatre, or some kind of sylvan spectacle. I have spent many an hour, when I was younger, floating over its surface as the zephyr willed, having paddled my boat to the middle, and lying on my back across the seats in a summer forenoon, dreaming the lake, until I was aroused by the boat touching the sand, and I rose to see what shore my fates had impelled me to. Days when idleness were the most attractive and productive industry. Do you think you could have a day where idleness is the most attractive and productive industry? Is that the type that you have? Many a forenoon have I stolen away, preferring to spend thus the most valued part of the day, for I was rich, if not in money, in sunny hours and sunny days, and spent them lavishly. Nor do I regret that I did not waste more of them in the worship or the teacher's desk. Do you think that sunny is sort of like money? Sunny is like having a lot of money. Mhm. Sunny is like having a lot of money. Many a forenoon have I stolen away, preferring to spend thus the most valuable part of the day, for I was rich, if not in money, in sunny hours and sunny days, and spent them lavishly, nor do I regret that I did not waste more of them in the workshop or the teacher's desk. But since I left those shores, the wood choppers have still further laid them waste. And now, for many a year, there will be no more rambling through the aisles of the wood, with occasional vistas through which you see the water. My muse may be excused if she is silent henceforth. My muse may be excused if she is silent henceforth. Do you excuse your muse? How can you expect the birds to sing when the groves are cut down? How can you excuse the muse? Now the trunks of trees on the bottom and the old log cabin canoe, and the old log canoe, and the dark surrounding woods are gone, and the villagers who scarcely know where it lies instead are going to the pond to bathe or drink, are thinking to bring its water, which shall be as sacred as the Ganges, at least, to the village, in a pipe to wash their dishes with, to earn their Walden by the turning of a cock or drawing of a plug, that devilish iron horse, whose ear-rending neigh is heard throughout the town, has muddied the boiling spring with his foot, and he it is that has browsed off all the woods on Walden shore, that Trojan horse, with 1,000 men in his belly, introduced by mercenary Greeks. Where is the country's champion, the Moor of Moorhall, to meet him at the deep cut, and thrush an avenging lance between the ribs of the bloated pest? Hmm. He browsed off all the woods with his Trojan horse. Do you think mercenary Greeks could be trusted? Do you trust Greeks bearing gifts? Nevertheless, of all the characters I have known, perhaps Walden wears best and best preserves its purity. Many men have been likened to it, but few deserve that honor. Do you think we could maintain our purity better by some lake up in the Adirondacks? Though the woodchoppers have laid bare first this shore and then that, and the Irish have built their sties by it, and the railroad has infringed upon its border, and the icemen have skimmed it all at once. It is itself unchanged, the same water which my youthful eyes fell on. All the change is in me. So the pond's the same, but he's saying he's changed. All the change is in me. It has not acquired one permanent wrinkle after all its ripples. It is perennially young, and I may stand and see a shallow dip apparently to pick an insect from a surface as of yore. It struck me again tonight, as if I had not seen it almost daily for more than 20 years. Why, here is Walden, the same woodland lake that I discovered so many years ago, when a forest was cut down last winter. Another springing up, I sure, as lustily as ever. The same thought is welling up to its surface that was then. It is the same liquid joy, and the happiness to itself and its maker, it may be to me. It is the work, it is the work of a brave man, surely in whom there is no guile. He rounded the sweater with his hand, deepened and clarified it in his thought, and in his will bequeathed it to Concord. I see by its face that it is visited by the same reflection. I can almost say, Walden, is it you? You think he could say that? Walden, is it you? It is no dream of mine to ornament a line. I cannot come near to God in heaven. Then I live to Walden even. I am its stony shore, and the breeze that passes over in the hollow of my hand are its water and its sand, and its deepest resort lies high in my thought. The cars never pause to look at it, yet I fancy that the engineers and firemen and brakemen and those passengers who have a season ticket to see it often are better men for the sight. The engineer does not forget at night, or his nature does not, that he has beheld this vision of serenity and purity once at least during the day. Though seen but once, it helps to wash out State Street and the engine's soot. One proposes that it be called God's drop. Do you think that it's just like a drop that fell out of God's eye, Walden Pond? Do you know how, like, the Ganges is really just flowed out of Shiva? The Ganges River came from Mount Kailash. Kailash. That's the mountain. Do you think that? Do you think? Do you think the Ganges is just something flowed out of Shiva? Do you think that Walden may just be a drop of God? Hmm. I have said that Walden has no visible inlet nor outlet, but it is on the one hand distinctly and indirectly related to Flint's Pond, which is more elevated by a chain of small ponds coming from that quarter, and on the other directly and manifestly to Concord River, which is lower, by a similar chain of ponds through which in some other geological periods it may have flowed, and by a little digging, which God forbid it can be made to flow thither again. Oh, it could be made to flow if you dig it up, right? So that men can go dig it. Mm-hmm. So he should know about these levels of the ponds. If he's a surveyor, he's probably able to make these statements. If by living thus, reserved and austere, like a hermit in the woods, so long I have acquired such wonderful purity, who would not regret that the comparatively impure waters of Flint's Pond should be mingled with it in itself, should ever go to waste its sweetness in the ocean wave. Hmm. 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 Itself should ever go to waste its sweetness in the ocean wave. Flint's or Sandy Pond in Lincoln, our greatest lake or inland sea, lies about a mile east of Walden, and it is much larger, being said to contain 197 acres, and is more fertile in fish, but it is comparatively shallow and not remarkably pure. Apparently Walden is the deepest pond in all of Massachusetts. And therefore, Thoreau is the deepest writer, or the depth of his writing is bottomless. A walk through the woods thither was often my recreation. It was worth the while, and if only to feel the wind blow on your cheek freely and see the waves run and remember the life of mariners. I went a chestnutting there in the fall on windy days when the nuts were dropping into the water and were washed to my feet. And one day, as I crept along its sledgy shore, the fresh spray blowing in my face, I came upon the mouldering wreck of a boat, and the sides gone, and hardly more than an impression of its flat bottom left amid the rushes. Yet its model was sharply defined, as if it were a large decayed pad with its veins. It was as impressive a wreck as one could imagine on the seashore, and had as good a morale. It is by this time mere vegetable mould, an undistinguishable pond shore, through which rushes the flags have pushed up. I used to admire the ripple marks on the sandy bottom at the north end of this pond, made firm and hard to the feet of the wader by the pressure of the water, and the rushes which grew in Indian file, in waving lines corresponding to these marks, rank behind rank, as if the waves had planted them. They also had found an considerable quantity curious balls, composed apparently of the fine grass or roots of pipe-wort, perhaps from half an inch to 4 inches in diameter, perfectly spherical. These wash back and forth in shallow water on sandy bottom and are sometimes cast on the shore. They are either solid grass or have a little sand in the middle. At first you would say they were formed by the action of the waves, like a pebble, yet the smallest are made of equally coarse materials, half an inch long, and they are produced only at one season of the year. Moreover, the waves, I suspect, do not so much construct as wear down a material which has already acquired consistency. They preserve their form when dry for an indefinite period. Flint's Pond, such is the poverty of our nomenclature. What right had the unclean and stupid farmer whose farm abutted in the sky water, whose shores he had ruthlessly laid bare, to give his name to it? Some skinflint who loved better the reflecting surface of a tower of bright scent in which he could see his own brazen face, who regarded even the wild ducks, which settled in it as trespassers, Do you think a wild duck is a trespasser on your pond? I thought we liked it when the wild ducks came. Remember when Dale bought ducks? Why did he buy ducks? Oh, for Easter. Dale, my brother, buy baby ducks and raise baby ducks, and then they would go onto the pond. But eventually, so why buy ducks if eventually they fly away? The Dale's ducks would fly away. Wild dogs would shuttle in as trespassers. The fingers. They come back, well, possibly, but his fingers grown into crooked and horny talons from the long habit of grasping harpy-like, so it is not named for me. I go not there to see him, nor to hear him, who never saw it, who never bathed in it, who never loved it, who never protected it, who never spoke a good word for it, nor thanked God that he had made it. What do you think we should do with Smith Pond? I think we should put, like, let's say, exact Walden house replica on it and call it. Rather, let it be named. We could call it Walden. We could have a tourist attraction, I guess. I don't know. It doesn't quite look like Walden, though. And the road is too close. Rather let it be, of course he had a train. Rather let it be named from the fishes that swim in it. The wildfowl or quadrupeds which frequented the wildflowers which grow by shore, or some wild man or child, the thread of which history is interwoven with its own, not from him who could show no title to it, but the deed which his like-minded neighbor or legislature gave him who thought only of its money value, whose presence put chains, cursed all the shore, who exhausted the land around it, and would fain have exhausted the waters within it, who regretted only that it was not English hay or cranberry meadow. There was nothing to redeem it, forsooth, in his eyes, and would have drained or sold it for the mud at its bottom. It did not turn his mill, and it was not privilege to him to behold it. I respect not his labors, his farm, where everything has its price. Who would carry the landscape, who would carry his God to market if he could get anything for him? What goes to market for his God as it is, on whose farm nothing grows free, whose fields bear no crops, whose meadows no flowers, whose trees no fruits, but dollars? Do you think you could just focus on dollars strictly? We could exploit the land and the pond, Flint's pond. We could exploit it. Who loves not the beauty of its fruits, whose fruits are not ripe for him till they are turned into dollars? Give me the poverty that enjoys true wealth. See, he's first date. Give me the poverty that enjoys true wealth. Farmers are respectable and interesting to me in proportion as they are poor. Poor farmers. He prefers poor farmers. Rich farmers are no good, apparently. Maybe they got rich because they exploited. A model farm where the house stands like a fungus in a muck heap. Chambers for men, horses, oxen, and swine, cleansed and uncleansed, all contiguous to one another. Stocked with men, a great grease spot, redolent of manures and buttermilk. under a high stake of cultivation being manured with the hearts and brains of man, if they were to raise your potatoes in the churchyard, as if you were to raise your potatoes in the churchyard. Such is the model farm. No. 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 If the faintest features of the landscape are to be named after man, let them be the noblest and unworthiest men alone. Let our likes receive as true names, at least as the Icarian sea, where, quote, still the shore, unquote, a brave attempt resounds. Goose Pond, of some extent, is, we're still reading in the Ponds. Goose Pond, of some extent, is on my way to Flint's Fairhaven, an expansion of Concord River, said to contain some 70 acres, is a mile southwest, and White Pond, of about 40 acres, is a mile and a half beyond Fairhaven. This is my lake country. These with Concord River are my water privileges, and night and day, year in, year out, they grind such grist as I carry to them. Since the wood cutters and the railroad and I myself have profaned Walden, perhaps the most attractive, if not the most beautiful of all our lakes, a gem of the woods is White Pond. A poor name. A poor name from its commonness. It's funny, in my poetry book, Smiling Whiteness, I have ducks on the pond as the cover. White Pond, a poor name from its commonness, whether derived from the remarkable purity of its waters, or the color of its sands. In these, as in other respects, however, it is a lesser twin of Walden. They are so much alike that you would say they must be connected underground. It was the same stony shore, and its waters are of the same hue as at Walden in sultry dog-day weather, looking down through the woods on some of its bays, which are not so deep but that the reflection from the bottom tinges them. Its waters are a misty bluish green of garcious color. Many years since I used to go there to collect the sand by cartloads, to make sandpaper with. How do you make sandpaper? Do you know? Thought we had all kinds of practical skills in scratch. Remember all those practical skills we saw in Crete? Remember those? What was the guy? They were making silk. They were growing silkworms. And what was the other skills they had? Cotton and wool, making wool and cotton, linen and flax, wasn't it? Linen. They made all those from scratch. Astonishing. It's like a lost art. All the arts are lost now. The local handmade arts. You could see that on Ant One TV. Many years since I used to go there to collect the sands by cartloads and make sandpaper with. I have continued to visit it ever since. One who frequents it proposes to call it Virid Lake. Perhaps it might be called Yellow Pine Lake from the following circumstance. About 15 years ago, you could see the top of a pitch pine, of all the kind called yellow pine hereabouts, though it is not a distinct species, projecting above the surface in depth water many rods from the shore. It was even supposed by some that the pond had sunk, and this was one of the primitive forests that formerly stood there. I find that even so long ago as 1792, in the topographical description of the town of Concord by one of its citizens in the collections of the Massachusetts Historical Society, author, after speaking of Walden and White Pond, adds, quote, In the middle of the latter may be seen, when the water is very low, a tree which appears as if it grew in the place where it now stands, although the roots are 50 feet below the surface of the water. The top of this tree is broken off, and at that place measures 14 inches in diameter. In the spring of '49, I talked about the man who lives nearest the pond in Sudbury, who told me that it was he who got out this tree 10 or 15 years ago. As near as he could remember, it stood 12 or 15 rods from the shore, where the water was 30 or 40 feet deep. It was in the winter, and he had been getting out ice in the forenoon, and had resolved that in the afternoon, with the aid of his neighbors, he would take out the old yellow pine. He sawed a channel in the ice towards the shore, and hauled it over and along and out onto the ice with oxen. But before he had gone far in his work, he was surprised to find that it was the wrong end upward, with the stumps of the branches pointing down, and the small end firmly fastened in the sandy bottom. It was about a foot in diameter at the big end, and he had expected to get a good saw log, but it was so rotten as to be fit only for fuel. If for that, he had some of it in his shed down there. Were marks of an axe and a woodpecker's on the butt. He thought that it might have been a dead tree on the shore, but it was finally blown over into the pond, and after the top had been waterlogged, while the butt end was still dry and light, had drifted out and sunk wrong end up. His father, 80 years old, could not remember when it was not there. Several pretty large logs may still be seen lying on the bottom, where, owing to the undulation of the surface, they look like huge water snakes in motion. This pond has rarely been profaned by a boat, for there is little in it to tempt a fisherman. Instead of the white lily, which requires mud, or the common sweet flag, the blue flag grows thinly in the pure water, rising from the stony bottom all around the shore, where it is visited by hummingbirds in June, and the color both of its bluish blades and its flowers, and especially its reflections, are in singular harmony with the gaseous water. White, Pond, and Walden are great crystals. Now he likes these two ponds, White and Walden. White Pond and Walden are great crystals on the surface of the earth, lakes of light. So what's the other lake, this lake of light? If they were permanently congealed and small enough to be clutched, they would perchance be carried off by slaves like precious stones to adorn the heads of emperors. But being liquid and ample, secure to us and our successors forever, we disregard them and run after the diamond of Koh-i-Noor. They are too pure to have a market value. They contain no muck. How much more beautiful than our lives, how much more transparent than our characters are they. We never learned meanness of them. How much fairer than the pond before the farmer's door in which his ducks swim. Much fairer than the pool before in which his ducks swim. Dale's ducks swim. How much fairer than the pool before the farmer's door in which Dale's ducks swim. Hither the clean wild ducks come. Nature has no human inhabitant who appreciates her. The birds with the plumage and the notes are in harmony with the flowers. But what youth and maiden conspires with the wild luxuriant beauty of nature? She flourishes most alone, far from the towns where they reside. Talk of heaven, ye disgrace earth. Do you think if we just talk about heaven, ye disgrace earth? Do we just talk about heaven sometimes? Talk of heaven, ye disgrace earth. End of section. We had read about the ducks swimming on Dale's Pond. ducks on smiling, wild ducks on smiling whiteness. In White Pond, in Walden Pond, there's his two favorites. What are his two favorites? White Pond and Walden Pond. Give me the poverty that enjoys true wealth. Farmers are respectable and interesting to me in proportion that they are poor flowers. They're more interesting, I suppose. God's drop. And these are just a teardrop from God. I think, Walden, is it you? And we had read how sunny is like having a lot of money. And my muse may be excused from saying that. Please excuse my muse. Did you excuse my muse? We finished reading about the pond, so more than one pond, Walden Pond and White Pond, and all the ponds, and Flint Pond, White Pond, Walden Pond, all the ponds, and Smith Pond. Did we read Smith Pond with its wild ducks? We did. And now it's taking over as Walden in Ohio.